Innovation, the growth lever for African economy by Deloitte. Hello everybody, for those who are welcoming us on our Emerging Valley Online Edition platform. There are more than 2,000 participants currently. There are a lot of discussion. There have been 25 workshops that have taken place since this morning, and you can find all of them on replay for free. We are becoming the Netflix of African entrepreneurship. And since yesterday, all of the events are on replay online on the platform. Go take a look. You can see all of the previous sessions, and now we are in the live part with Deloitte, who is a partnership where we'll be with Mohamed Ali Malouche, who is the lead partner, IDO and public sector at Deloitte, and he's going to give us a masterclass on open innovation between Europe and Africa. So how can we make it a growth lever for African economies? Mohamed, how are you? Thank you very much, Samir. I'm very good, thank you. How are you? We are very happy that you're with us directly here today. The floor is yours. So let's get started. Your presentation will come up and then you can get going. Thank you very much, Samia. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you today at Emerging Valley. Even to see so much talent and innovators digitally, it's great. Today, I'm going to speak to you about innovation, and in particular, open innovation. It's a concept which is developing in the world, not enough in Africa, but it has proven to have a lot of hope for startups, for you, but for all economic players, big companies, governments, public authorities, etc., in Africa. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So what is open innovation and why is it important? Today, if you are the head of a company or a decision maker in the public sector, you're probably regularly asking yourself how you can be more innovative, have more impact, how you can invent and reinvent yourself in the digital era. So working with startups is important. And for many public authorities, this is a great way to undertake innovation in a new way. Everybody around the world is starting to understand that startups, in particularly with tech startups, are having a great impact on entire industries. So large companies and governments are no longer seeing startups as young people just trying something out or as a threat, but as partners in order to add value, in order to serve companies with innovation and the public in general. So open innovation is a company or public entity which is focusing its research, development, and innovation not simply in a closed mindset, but also by integrating exterior help from startups in particular. So today, as you can see on the screen, the companies in the image in red, this is companies which are focused on their internal expertise and their current technological tools to develop their ideas, but these ideas are relative to their own experience, and if that doesn't correspond to their own experience, they get rid of it. There are no new ideas which come out. The image in green, however, is cross borders in terms of innovation. They look at new ideas, new technology, and it enables companies to enlarge their services offer and perhaps even include other organizations. So what are the advantages of open innovation? Let me just move on to the next slide. So for the companies, they earn more skill, they get more skills, it helps them to accelerate their market arrival. And for startups, it's the opportunity to benefit from a network, an experience of a large group, from it, their network, their experience, and of course also from their funding. Now, of course, there are challenges, and it's mainly related to legal challenges. This cooperation has to be properly documented using contracts, especially with startups. It has to be done by lawyers because there shouldn't be any misunderstandings with regards to intellectual property, for example, or the shared IP models. But there are other models for partnerships with certain perimeters, but it has to be win-win for everybody, really. So on the next slide, it explains the different innovation models. There are two extremes. So for example, what the extreme where there's no open innovation, or the other extreme is that it's all open source, open innovation. So the weakness is trying to do innovation in-house. The open source side of things is innovating as a community. And this is the model which, for example, Wikipedia has chosen, or Linux. Now, in the middle, we have three open innovation models, which are the most common. The first one is outsourcing, which, for example, is when we have R&D, we ask for external companies to help us, or startups or universities even. But essentially, the startup will be a service provider. This was the case in various companies, for example, WhatsApp. They had startups and developers who helped them succeed. Slack used startups and developers in Canada in order to develop their product. The second type of open innovation is a licensing model. This is when innovation departments in companies and governments and public authorities identify external solutions and acquire them. They then modify them, and this was the case for a lot of e-commerce solutions. Or, for example, GI or Unilever, these companies which really love this kind of model. They organize hackathons. GI, if you look on their website, there is an open innovation web page where they speak about all types of innovation which can help them. The third model, which is the most interesting, I think, and which is developing the most, which is collaboration and co-creation and co-design. This means the risk is shared and the rewards are shared. We see today, for example, with Pfizer and biotech, who have developed a vaccination in record time in order to fight against COVID. That is an example of open innovation in which there was a collaboration between a big corporation and a smaller corporation in order to arrive at a result much quicker. Biotech itself actually uses startups to progress its research. There's also a Tunisian company which works in artificial intelligence, which is currently helping biotech to develop their solutions much quicker. There are many other examples in the industry. If unfortunately we want to stay in the theme of COVID, so the medical sector, there's Medtronic. They publish their technical requirements for creating fans so that different startups around the world can develop them to the same standard as them. So these are the different models which exist in open innovation. Each of these models have different charters. As I said before, it's incredibly important to understand that the IP can be shared, there are IP shared rights or shared ownership, as like with other agreements, like marketing agreements. So there are many different models. It's very manageable, and this is happening all over the world. So now on the next slide, we can see that Africa is a fantastic ecosystem of entrepreneurship which is developing and has been developing in the last 10 years. And in fact, it's going to make Africa become an innovative hub. Africa is innovating, it's doing it quickly. It's not completely inclusive because a part of this innovation in certain hubs are limited, but that's normal. That's what we would expect. We are innovating in these hubs, and then there will be a spillover effect. Open innovation, however, is not quite moved into the concrete side of the African entrepreneurship industry, but things are changing quickly. So in the following slide, I'm going to show you the example of Tunisia. Following the crisis of COVID-19, there were big private companies and governments as well who are using prototypes and the concepts which have originated with startups. And this is to help them resolve real problems of public services and health services. So, for example, there is a mobile payment system in large banks. Another example is an e-commerce solution which has been taken on by a licensing model by a large distribution company in Tunisia. There's another example of protective data analytics by the Pasteur Institute, which is to help study the evolution of the pandemic. They look at different scenarios via lockdown measures. And there's also another example, which is using a robot in a lockdown city. And it's used for reasons of security. Now, there are lots of examples in Africa, especially in telecommunication. They are they really enjoy this kind of partnership with startups. Even in the banking industry, they're a little bit more cautious, but they are still getting into this type of partnership. Now, on to the second last slide. Let's discuss how we can accelerate and help sustain open innovation in Africa. Like all big changes, we have to raise awareness. There is change management on the public sector level, so for government level, because it's a way to accelerate the innovation and there's a lot more value for the economy on a level with large companies and also entrepreneurs' mindsets of entrepreneurs who are fearful, which is completely normal. Now, this maturity of open innovation, well, in fact, it isn't quite there yet. There is no maturity. What we have to do is help encourage dialogue between entrepreneurial ecosystems and the public sector. So, for example, strengthening open data, how to integrate startups into the system. I'm thinking, for example, of all smart city projects in Africa. And many startups are involved in this, but they could be many more could be part of this in order to help digitalize public services. They need more incentives as well. Governments could set up initiatives in order to encourage an open innovation model. And they could even maybe reserve a little part of their contract for small startups, as, for example, small business acts, which we find across the world. So I'm going to conclude this presentation with this last slide to say that here in Deloitte Africa, we are very convinced that open innovation is an incredibly important choice for Africa. It's a strategic choice for us to encourage startups to be part of various programs and to work with large clients, governments. We are the natural player to bring all of these other players together. We have a range of activities to help with co-creation, whether it's our greenhouse, our garage, which is an entrepreneurship laboratory. And we believe that open innovation should be very much led by teamwork. Deloitte Africa today has 5 winners, which you're seeing on the screen right now. They are emerging Mediterranean startups, and we're going to give these 5 winners a program of innovation, and I hope in a couple of months' time at the Deux Rives Summit we can talk about this program and how it has gone, if it's been successful. So thank you very much and have a great day. Thank you very much for this great keynote presentation. It's a great way to make innovation accessible to everybody. And so this partnership, which we have just announced, is that with Deloitte Africa rather, and Emerging Mediterranean. So we have 5 winners, as Mohammed said. So Emerging Mediterranean is the initiative from the Deux Rives Summit. We did, the last summit was on the 14th of December with 5 winners from Algeria, Tunisia, Algeria and other countries. We are now supporting these startups. We are supporting them with regards to open innovation and legal issues, thanks to Deloitte, and we would like to thank them. And we will have the next Deux Rives Summit in Marseille in November this year. Thank you very much, Mohammed. I will speak to you soon. It was a pleasure to work with you and to work with such an innovative company as Deloitte. Now we're going to go one step further, because now we are going to move on to our next plenary. We're going to speak about startups, large clients, and Mohammed gave us a great example of how successful that is. But we're also going to include SMEs who are not necessarily in the digital sector, because it's quite complicated, especially during a context like COVID. They often have to make links. However, I'm very happy today that we have Yves Delafont, who's the president of Africa Link, and he's going to moderate this session. We will have Olivier Mathieu, Mohamed and Tariq. So Yves Delafont, if you could come onto the stage and you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. I'm very pleased to be participating in Emerging Valleygen as president of Africa Link to support this fantastic initiative, which is a building block to build this hub between territory between France and Europe and Africa. We've just heard from Deloitte about innovation. This is sharing based on collaboration for companies who are no longer closed inwards, but are opening up instead to external partners. In Africa, there's a proliferation of digital innovation, especially, and other types of innovation. This confirms the dynamic nature of this continent, which is in the process of becoming a new driver for world growth. And this certainly partly is happening thanks to digital. At the moment, there will be large digital companies in Africa. At the moment, they're small, and we are here to help them grow. As a preliminary, we have Jumia. We also have this fintech with Flutterwave, enabling interoperability between the systems, which was first set up in 2016, and which today represents $1 billion. So in this process, how do we need to see how we can change from innovation to production and operation. Today, around me, I have three panelists. I'm going to present to you very quickly Olivier Machaut, Mohamed Assouvé, and Olivier Notary. Perhaps I'd like to ask you a question first of all, is how you create these chains of effective and efficient players which will make it possible to create the value that comes with innovation. I'll start with Mr. Assoué. Good afternoon. You are CEO of Djibouti Telecom. And in your description of your concerns, I noted that that we were talking about the pathway between cooperation and competition. I talked about this co-competition concept. Could you say a few words about that? Bearing in mind that your role as a player in telecoms in Djibouti is essential in order to build this remarkable carrefour that Djibouti is between our continents. Mr. Assoué, over to you. I'm afraid I didn't hear the beginning of your presentation. I'll try to answer and talk a little bit more about co-competition. Which is part of collaborative innovation, which is the theme of our discussion. There is a curve that is we can define that lies between competition, cooperation, and collaboration, and knowledge. In knowledge, everything is well organized and well structured, and the partners will merge together. Co-competition is something where you can collaborate, but at the same time there is some competition between you. This is what happens in major groups, also between startups, where the small group business can work with a larger group. Collaborative innovation is something else. So I have a lot of things to say. And we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'll try to be brief and look at the different important elements of collaborative innovation. This is very important, especially bearing in mind the pandemic. We can see that today, alone, we cannot find solutions. So we have to work together. We have to help each other. So the idea of collaboration is an area where digital technology plays an important role. It gives us a new way of approaching new concepts. There's a lot at stake in these issues of collaborative innovation, such as intellectual property, culture. And the fact that you have an operator, for example, with several thousand employees in telecoms, we have undersea cables, etc. If tomorrow we, as a big company, want to work with a startup and we want to open up the information system so that the startup can become a partner, it can become part of the Djibouti Telecom ecosystem, there are certain things that have to be put in place. You have to bear in mind the corporate culture and the culture of a startup are not the same. They're much more agile. Whereas a large company, such as ourselves, is a huge machine with all kinds of processes and procedures. For the last 3 years, we have put in place a business process to improve these business processes. To improve production, to make our operations more productive and more efficient. It's true today that digital transformation of businesses enable us to work in a more similar way to startups. I think efforts have to be made on both sides, on both the sides of the startup and the side of a major group like us. And digital technology introduces this new paradigm that we have to take into account. When you talk about change, there are inevitably blockages, and then people sometimes tend to start looking inwards. And on the contrary, we have to get our employees to look outwards towards startups. Often startups produce small applications, and these kinds of applications can be extremely beneficial for us as a large operator. I don't want to take up too much time because there are a lot of things that can be said about collaborative innovation. And it's very difficult to achieve convincing results. But we know this is something that is being used in Japan, in the United States, and in Europe. And it has been successful. But so far in Africa, this has not been the case. Because in Africa, the fabric of startups is very much at an embryonic stage. So we try to stimulate and energize this fabric of startups to have a more dynamic digital ecosystem. This could be the benefit of public sector bodies for the government and also for large groups such as ourselves. There are many things to be done in this area. I hope I've answered your question to some extent. I will stop there for the moment. Yes, we'll try to come back to this later. Thank you for these thoughts, especially about the role of Djibouti Telecom. I would like to react with Emmanuel Notary. Emmanuel is the CEO of Anima. He represents the president of Anima today, Tariq Sharif, who was unable to be with us. Anima is a platform economic cooperation between Europe and the Middle East and Africa, but he's more specialized in the Mediterranean rim. Emmanuel, we've heard about an important aspect here. We talk about this development chain of open innovation with startups, SMEs, and major groups. But what about the role of the state, of the government? Could you say a few words about that? And perhaps something else over the next 5 minutes? Thank you for the invitation. We're very pleased to be a partner with Emerging Valley once more. Yes. Open innovation, Mediterranean or in Africa, is perhaps a response to the challenges that are being posed by the COVID crisis. What's going to happen at the end of this crisis, when it ends, is we're going to have relocation activities closer to African markets and European markets. We hope to see this movement. I think that the Mediterranean countries, which is the area we work in the most, they have to compare themselves with the Asian countries where these activities are located. And where are their weaknesses? And the weaknesses are in the area of technology. Today, the investment in R&D is low, and it's mainly public sector. The SMEs and even the major companies do not invest sufficiently in R&D. The FDI are not very much in the technological fields either in Mediterranean countries. In that context, open innovation can be an effective solution at two levels, at least. What is open innovation? Open innovation is innovation that enables a company to develop with external partners through external acquisition or through collaboration with external partners. What does this mean? This means for SMEs that they are working not only with startups or with research labs. This isn't done very much, quite honestly. We are part of the Next Society initiative you may have heard of. We've been doing this for several years. It's difficult to get research labs to work with SMEs because they work in silos, in fact. The world of SMEs and world of research are not worlds that cohabit easily. There may be one area in which this could work, which is through clusters, these technological centers and these transdisciplinary networks where you have academic research and scientific research. You have companies and large groups, small companies, where they're all in the same place. This can work. And this, in fact, did work during the COVID crisis this year. We've seen this in Morocco in two clusters. I would like to mention, which is the CE3N cluster working in electronics, in which, in fact, conducted open innovation between large groups, startups, and research labs in order to create an artificial ventilator, 100% made in Morocco, everything made in Morocco, and sourced in Morocco. I can give you the list of companies that were involved, if you like. The Albirai, Piloptic, which is a small startup in biotech, CRNP, which is a member of another cluster, which is called GMAS in robotics, then Valtronic, and the Masia Foundation, which also was involved. This means that in a place like a cluster, then you can have this kind of open innovation, because quite honestly, SMEs are not going to source externally, whereas it's necessary, in fact. For Mediterranean markets, this is necessary. You have to source externally if you want to compare ourselves with Asian countries, if we want to make sure we have innovation staying in the Mediterranean. Another important point, as we've just heard, is the public sector. And we've heard this about this in the crisis with the Ministry for Higher Education, who's launched the XTech Challenge, who called on the Tunisian SMEs for help. In fact, they mobilized this startup ecosystem to find solutions and answers to the COVID-19 crisis. And this has generated startup projects and developments within startups where they've created tools for diagnosis, tools for protection against the virus, and tools for the healthcare professionals, call centers, hospital bed management, to optimize the way beds are used in hospitals. So these are making a lot of use of startups at different scales. We've seen a year and a half ago in the Sud region, in the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur region, we have the Zero Plastic Challenge, asking startups and SMEs around the Mediterranean to participate. And we saw companies from Egypt and Tunisia participating in this to reduce their use of plastics. And we've seen this in Catalonia too, with the Axio Economic Development Agency from the regional government of Catalonia, creating a marketplace to favor collaboration and between enterprises and research labs in Catalonia to solve issues connected with COVID. There have been other solutions in fintech and education, of course, solutions for education, production of different types of hand gel, and all this was done by businesses in that region. So the public sector can launch this, and the clusters also can be a useful solution because they are areas of collaboration. And these are areas where open innovation can take place. Thank you, Emmanuel. We've talked about this competition and co-competition between actors in the value of innovation, in the chain of innovation. I'd like to hand over now to Olivier Mathieu, Mathieu is a co-founder of Price Minister, ex he's president of Rakuten in France. He's also a business angel, and he's aiming to invest €1 billion by 2030. He's also the co-founder of the president of the camp, which is a rather unique innovation place dedicated to entrepreneurs, businesses, and local authorities. So here we have a new link in this open innovation chain, which is absolutely vital because it prefigures, it prepares for the meeting between startups, the entrepreneurs, and these new partners. So, Olivier, these third places, such as a camp, what role can they play? First of all, I'd like to say hi to everybody. I'd like to thank you for inviting me. We are a company very much turned towards the Mediterranean. We are always very attentive to innovation and everything that can happen in terms of ideas from entrepreneurs in Africa. And we are based in the Aix-Marseille region. So we're part of this family of clusters that Emmanuel mentioned earlier. It's called a third place. It's not an office or the home. It's between the two. We're in this third place between the home and the place of work. I'm looking for ideas and innovation. And as a cluster, we try to bring together the private sector groups and the public sector groups. We get the private sector and public sector to work together. It's not always easy. They don't always speak the same language and have the same cultures and same codes. But we try to get the SMEs and the startups to work with the major groups. This is the mix, and so this is can be a very useful solution. This mixture of different cultures and different languages is also something that enables us to create friction and sparks, which can lead to great ideas. To get all of these people to work together and collaborate, you have to have a dedicated method. After the last 3 or 4 years that I've spent at the camp, there are several problems. One problem is suspiciousness. There's a lot of suspicion. As I mentioned at the beginning of the roundtable, suspicion can come from the startups and also from the big groups, because the big groups don't want to let go of their intellectual property, and they tend to feel that they're owners of their innovation. If I want to innovate, I can find things with my research teams out, and they want to keep it for themselves. They don't want to share. This is the contrary of the open source approach, where you get different communities to work together. For example, on software development. So often these big groups have this ownership approach. They don't want to share their innovation. When you're a director of innovation in a big group, you get the feeling that you have to be the source of innovation. It's difficult for you to collaborate with other entities. That's the first source of suspicion. Sometimes the startups are suspicious too. They have advantages. They're more agile and quicker. They're very innovative, but often they're afraid of being eaten up or being copied or absorbed by the big group, and of not reaping the benefit of the work that they have done and that they want to benefit from. So you have to create the right conditions to foster trust. That's the idea of the camp. We work a lot on prototyping and collective intelligence. In other words, getting the best practices and know-how together so we can sort people on the path together to open innovation. And then after that, there's another problem, apart from creating conditions of trust, which is to get different cultures and different languages to communicate. So we act as a translator. If you speak English or French or another language, very often you realize it's not sufficient to have a simple translation. There's often jargon and different working rates that are different. So there's a kind of idea of translation and passing between different cultures, which is important as well. We've had some success stories I'd like to share with you to give you some concrete examples. We've developed a very interesting project with an Indian startup called Boglab. It's a solar camp project, which is a vehicle-to-grid project, an electric vehicle project, which can be shared by using blockchain to share the electrical energy that is in the electric vehicles, and they can be then connected to the railway station. We're working on this with the SNCF, and with Vinci, where they might have recharges in the railway car parks. And we're also working with the Accenture group, who is providing the AI rather. This makes it possible to share the electricity stored in the electric batteries of the vehicles, and this can be then stored in a car park or railway station. This means you can have an all-grid vehicle, so the different electrical energy can be shared between the vehicles and the buildings. That's one innovation. There is a need for resources that are provided by the big groups. The capacity for innovation and agility is provided by the startup. There's another vehicle for autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles. We're all working with the public sector on that. For example, of course, we have the Metropole and the Regional Council who are working with startups such as Mila, which is producing the navigation system for the driverless vehicles, and IVD, who is developing an application for reservation to use this driverless vehicle. And we're working again with the Accenture group. So we get the big groups and the startups and the local authority to work together. Another example, which is in the Marseille region, is what we call the smart port. How we can together get local companies in Provence to work to have a port authority in Marseille, which will be competitive compared to Barcelona or Genoa or the other Mediterranean ports, where there's already strong competition on the maritime traffic. Here again, we're getting startups to work to identify particular aspects of management of energy and flows so that they can optimize the energy efficiency. And with the Port Authority of Marseille, so working with the CMEGM, a big shipping company, and the local authority, the regional council, and a number of startups. And we are using hackathon model. We're working on sprints. We're talking about agile development. You get the startups in a kind of pipeline, like in a tunnel or a syringe, so that we can then prototype the different services, and the whole thing will eventually, in a few years, represent the port of the future. So those are my 3 examples. Thank you very much, Olivier, for these very precise examples. It's true that this chain of innovation that is being built up does have a gap in producing experimentation and creating big success stories. We need to see that it can work. I have a few seconds left. I'm sorry, because we could have gone into more detail, in particular about this, talking about trust that you mentioned, Olivier, and it's absolutely vital on all sides, but also the idea of the administrative, political and legal environment and tax environment as well. And the idea of the rule of law is important too.
So I would like to thank you all on behalf of Emerging Valley for discussing these important subjects and your thoughts on the issue. Unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time to speak about this, but I would suggest that anybody who's interested can speak directly to the speakers. I'm sure Emerging Valley has their contact details. So thank you very much, Olivier, Mohammed and Tarek. Have a wonderful day and goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.